This video is brought to you by The Vine on YouTube and by The Storyteller on Facebook.
Recovery. By Roger Hansen. Chapter 1. What makes me laugh, cry, the good and the bad. 1. What makes me laugh? I can remember a small farm that we lived on, a wreck involving a big military tow truck used for semis and burning down the barn on a small farm. We lived on the small farm next to the pastures and barn. We used to have to chase the cattle back into the gates, and I found a dead animal under the house once. My sister, brother, and I used to make vehicles out of cardboard boxes and drag each other in the dirt. We enjoyed the dust flying everywhere. I can remember the flatbed truck that always broke down every time we left Illinois when I was a kid. We would get out of the town where my grandparents lived in, and as soon as we did, the truck would screw up. Once the hub caught on fire and the tire slid off while we were still driving. I still recall the tire running down the street beside us. My grandfather had about 5 or 6 popcorn poppers from the 40s in the backyard when I was a kid. My Uncle Elmer and all of us kids eventually got together and scrapped them out for metal. Aluminum up the yin-yang. I can remember Grandpa trying to sell soda and ice cream. He always filled the front room from top to bottom with 6-packs and 12-pack of bottled soda. Everyone in the neighborhood would come over to buy soda from him. He even ran a tab. After a while he stopped doing that, so he tried his hand on ice cream, yet us grandkids would always steal his supply. He would get so mad. I lost my virginity at 11 when we lived in Florida. Her name was Michelle. When I hung out with Craig and Greg, Michelle's brothers, we would all stay up all night and watch hot television. That was when MTV first became a hit, and Friday night was full of video television. We would stay up all night. Sometimes we would drink beer, sometimes we would do little things like catch frogs and throw them as high as we could into the air to watch them smack against the street. In the daytime, we would walk down creek beds and pretend that we were discovering new lands. We would swim in a semi-docking bay full of water just across the street from their house. I can also recall a day when we collected cans all morning for spare change, shoplifted some tapes and cigarettes, and went down to the riverbank to swim. All in the same day. In Florida at that time, it was the thing to hang out in all-night laundromats at all hours of the night. We would do that too. That's how I first learned how to rob soda machines. The old ones, that is. The newer ones are a lot harder to get into. We would race Hot Wheels around the trailer court in Georgia because it was set up like a racetrack. It had a paved circular road that went around the trailer court. Half of it went up a hill and then the other half shot down. Then it went back around until it went up the hill again. All the kids in the trailer court had a ball with that. We would all get together and race around it. I can remember popping my Hot Wheel up on 2 wheels at times while taking corners. I know that the trailer court was around Atlanta, yet I was too young, so I can't be precise. I can also remember trying to catch wild turkeys there too. In Florida, we used to worry about wild boars coming out of the woods, and we would chase wild turkeys in Georgia. We would visit Lithia Springs all the time. Even after moving from Georgia to Florida, we would travel all the way back to go there. We would get up early, pack all of the food and travel in the morning, getting there just as it was warm enough to swim. The first time I had ever gotten a fish hook stuck in me was at Stone Mountain. It stuck right in my belly. Scared the heck out of me. My family seemed to like Georgia, but my mom couldn't handle all of the clay. Clay was everywhere, and it was constantly being dragged into the house. Georgia is also where our family first gave my baby sister the nickname Little Mama, and she grew into the name eventually. She still thinks she's everyone's mother. After living in Georgia and Florida a few times though, my parents decided it would be best to travel to Arizona. My dad had plans to make it to Bullhead, Arizona. It took a week and a half to get there, and it was one of the worst times of my life. The car was fine until just around Mississippi, then it started overheating constantly, so we had to pull over almost every half an hour. The muffler started dragging, so we had to use a clothes hanger to hold the muffler up, yet it was constantly falling back down on the ground. So there we were pulling over to cool the car down or putting the muffler back up with a cloth hanger. We had 10 people with us. Our family of 6, Ed, Linda, their baby and Linda's sister. I can't remember the baby's name or her sister's name either. At the beginning of the trip, we had to let all of our cats loose because it was too overcrowded to bring them with us. We still had our family dog Brownie though. We were tight on money, so instead of sleeping in hotels, we would sleep in rest areas, in the car and on the tables. It didn't matter. I was able to see the Border Patrol bust a lot of illegal aliens at the border though, in San Antonio. Interstate 10 travels right next to the Mexican border and a rest area is just on top of a hill looking down at it all taking place. We traveled all the way to Arizona on Interstate 10. By the time we made it to Tucson though, the money was running out. We stopped at a park and literally stayed there all day long, while Eddie and my dad tried to find some kind of organization that would give us money for our trip. It didn't work though, yet. They decided to finish the trip at least as far as we could go until we couldn't drive anymore. By the way, I never did see Bullhead, Arizona. We made it to Coolidge and had to stay in a homeless shelter for about a month until we finally got a small apartment. I've seen trailers put in the middle of cow pastures that are about a mile away from the nearest gate out. My family has lived in the middle of nowhere, in houses made completely out of concrete. Once we lived in an old shack set up on legs. It's pretty interesting when I think about it today. Stealing cigarettes from my parents. We moved to Arizona when I was just about to turn 13. I can remember having my 13th birthday, just after moving on to Dugan's Dairy. I first smoked marijuana with my friend Anthony. I thought at one time that I was 13, yet I may have been older. Around 15 maybe. Anthony was my first actual rebel friend. I first met him, and I wanted what he had, whatever that was. We started drinking together first, then I met his brother Tommy, and that was when I started smoking pot. We would ask one of the Mexicans to go down to the liquor store in Queen Creek Heights for some booze. They would, so we always got drunk on the weekend. To the side of the dairy, the Dugans had cotton seeds stacked on a concrete surface. They had hills of cottonseed and all of us would go there to drink and play. I remember getting drunk and sitting on huge hills of cottonseed, staring down on the dairy farm below. When I finally met Tommy, he reminded me of Jim Morrison, I swear. I idolized him. In my eyes he was a god. One night, I was over at Anthony's house and his dad was having friends over. They were drinking margaritas made with grapefruit. Anthony was sneaking cups of it to me in his room, and that was when I met Tommy. He smoked a joint with me that night, and it was the first time I had ever gotten stoned. I had smoked pot before, but never enough to get completely blasted like I did that night. All that I know is, my ears popped and went low. I could barely hear and it felt like my eyes were going to pop out of my face. I lay back on the bunk bed staring up at Anthony's posters. He had 2 of them. One was an Elvis Costello poster and the other was Judas Priest. From that point on we always smoked pot with Tommy. I can still remember nights in Hibley, staring at the lights off in the distance. I wanted to be in those lights so much. I eventually got to be in them, yet they weren't all that they were cut out to be. From time to time, I still wish that I had that innocence that I had back then, yet it's gone. I would write a lot of fiction, and my mind would fill up with imagination. I would write about being people that I always wanted to become, yet never could. To self-evaluate me, though, became the whole me. I overdid it. Mental masturbation. I saw a wall painted, on television, with a saying that I still love. Life is what happens while we are planning stuff. That is so full of truth, in my opinion. 2. What makes me cry? With my family, you can never tell. We usually put mattresses up on top of regular cars and tied them down. That was back when you could get away with it, though. The first time I met my Uncle Bill, it scared the heck out of me. He has so far served 2 terms in prison, once for molesting his kids. My parents would try hard to make it in Florida, yet every time, back to Illinois we went. I can recall my mom suffering from depression so bad, she would take sleeping pills to sleep all day. Staying at my grandparents' house. She was molested by my grandfather as a little girl. It's hard for her to let go of. My grandparents' house wasn't that good either. They still had a wood burner and no plumbing. They used a bucket as a toilet and buried the remains in the backyard until a sewer was put in the alley out back. Then they dumped the buckets there. They used a kid's swimming pool and boiled water to give us baths, and a water hose from the backyard ran into the kitchen window to supply water to the house. My grandpa's legs eventually were amputated, because of gangrene. They had to cut off his testicles in the end, and he was pronounced hopeless because it eventually entered his bloodstream. My grandparents both died together on the same day. A house fire. I had to talk to a psychiatrist about that in treatment, and the hardest thing for me to handle is if he went to hell or not. I try not to think about it though, stuck in a hard spot between son and grandson. My dad and his friend Bones. Bones had 2 boys and a girl. His daughter was Michelle and his sons' names were Craig and Greg, that were twins. I thought the world of them. I thought they felt the same way until I later found out they molested my baby sister. I didn't know that either, until much later when I was 17. I really never fit in with other kids. I loved to play the victim. Everyone picked on me and I couldn't accept that. I wanted approval, and don't get me wrong, people picking on someone isn't good. Wanting approval isn't necessarily good either. I would play the part though. I was an actor, and I did what I thought I had to so that I could get attention. I can remember acting dumb and tell the other kids that I was stupid so that they would give me some attention. I went to school in Lake Placid, for part of the 5th grade, and I was constantly getting beat up. I can remember hiding out, in between classes and during breaks so that I wouldn't get bullied. I can remember this time when I was in my agriculture class, and I was holding one of the garden hose with the sharp edge up. A classmate who didn't like me came charging at me with a wheelbarrow, hitting the garden hose, causing it to cut my eyebrow real bad. The school sends me to the infirmary. They put a bandage on it and made me go to class. I guess they figured that I should go home, and then my parents could take care of the problem. I was constantly wanting attention from people who didn't like me. It was as though I felt everyone should like me. I used to imagine getting even with the other kids and what I would do to them. It was a constant thought, always in my head. I really can't tell you when all of these problems started either. I can also tell you, my parents were partying hard and heavy. A lot of drinking and extramarital affairs. This caused our family to become very dysfunctional as time went on, and I eventually, later on in Arizona, stopped talking to my father altogether. I would say a word to him for about 6 months, and I never really got along with him again after that either. Nights that we would come home from parties with all of us kids in the back seat. I would sit in the middle staring ahead out of the windshield, watching traffic. My dad had a way of doing things. He's the reason why U-Haul is so hard on people about their vehicles. He would rent a U-Haul and tell them that it was for moving locally, get the truck, move halfway across the country and dump the truck off late at night, in a U-Haul station. He didn't want to pay the extra cash. My family moved into the trailer that had someone who was just murdered in it. I heard about that and it didn't sit right with me. Apparently, it was a woman, and her ex-boyfriend or ex-husband had a problem with her leaving him. So, he took a gun, placed her head under the mattress of the bed, and blew her head off. I can still to this day remember that story. See, most dairies have what we call a landlord system. They usually put trailers and houses on their land to house their employees. That was one of the big reasons why my dad liked working dairy. No rent or electricity. Needless to say, my dad was cheap. My siblings and I eventually caused too much trouble and my dad's boss told him to move us off the dairy. Then my dad quit soon after, and we moved away from the country to Mesa, Arizona. That would be the last time I ever lived in the country. When I wrote my poems as a teenager, they were pretty morbid. I was always playing the victim, not saying that I didn't come from a dysfunctional family and everything was great, but I used those things as excuses for behaving the way I did. My poetry was a way of venting my problems, and that was a positive thing, but I grew tired of it and stopped. Now, when I write poems, it seems harder. I don't feel as though I have as much emotion as I used to. I was constantly in la la land, never grounded. I think that had to do with my thinking, though. I was constantly all about that. I can remember sleeping on the rooftop of empty apartments in apartment complexes all the time. It was all because of that self-delusional way of thinking. My life was fiction. I do miss the whole imagination thing, though.
This video is brought to you by The Vine on YouTube and by The Storyteller on Facebook. Thanks for watching. If you like the video, please like, subscribe, share, make comments.